So we've recently gotten some pretty massive potential leaks for the future of World of Warcraft, and this is from a survey that was sent out in Germany talking about potential new classes coming to the game and basically asking what classes these survey takers would be most interested in. And if you've never followed or seen any leaked Blizzard surveys before, they basically always predate some big addition or change coming to a video game. Before Diablo 4 was launched, we actually got a bunch of surveys on pre-order bonuses, and most of the pre-order bonuses for Diablo 4 were in these surveys. Some of the stuff is just kind of thrown in there to give you different options and take you off the scent of what they actually want information on, but a lot of it ends up being true, including a bunch of surveys for WoW Classic and even a bunch of surveys for WoW Retail in the past. And there are a bunch of potential class ideas in these surveys, even having things like Tinkers and Bards. Now, before we get into all this information, there's a few possible things that this survey could actually be trying to get information on. First off, they're actually just asking you about classes they have ideas for and what people would be interested in. So one of these classes could be added in Midnight or possibly in The Last Titan. Some of them sounding like they're more towards The Last Titan, and that's all the survey would be about. What classes would you be most interested in? Second, it could be them asking about new specs for certain classes. Now, some of the stuff in here does fit into that and could work well, but some of this stuff really doesn't fit into adding a new spec to a pre-existing class. And then the third thing could be that these are hero talent choices for the existing classes. I've said before that I think it's a guarantee that in future expansions, we are going to be getting more hero talent choices. That's actually a really good way to give classes more horizontal options without increasing the vertical power of them. You just add another hero talent option, and that doesn't actually increase your power, it just gives you more options. So I think it's going to be one of those three things: either just be a new class, be new specs for pre-existing classes, or be new hero talents. Going over some of this, I actually think it's the first probably. It sounds like they're legitimately just asking about new classes that they could possibly add in the future. And it is also very interesting that there are so many ideas in these questions. There's a ridiculous amount of class possibilities. And like I mentioned, it could just be them adding in a bunch of things to try to keep you off the trail of the actual thing they're trying to get information on, or they could legitimately have this many things they're kind of working on or trying to test out to see if it would work well in the game. And maybe we're going to be getting classes much more often in the game, which could be really interesting. And also keep in mind, we don't have like any of the options for these questions. We really just have the questions. But survey page 1, when you choose which class you want to play in WoW, which of the following information sources do you use or find useful? So this is probably asking you, do you look on the official website of classes? Do you just open up the game and look at the descriptions? Do you go look at Wowhead or build guides? Then survey page 2, when you choose a playable class in WoW, which of the following factors do you consider? This is probably play styles or animations or just general things you would choose a class based off of. Survey page 3, if WoW would add a new class, which role should it have? So tank, healer, DPS, presumably they also have like support in there. And then survey page 4 is when we get into the interesting stuff. Answer the following question for the concept of a Tinker class. Also, Tinker is one of those classes that has just been theorized by the community for like over a decade at this point. Just having a Tinker class that's like a goblin or a gnome or something putting down turrets is always something people have always wanted. But this goes on to have Prismatic as heirs to Titanic power. Prismatics are carriers of cosmic powers that can not only be used in their purest forms, but their transcending powers can be merged to new powers. They refine and focus the power of life to heal allies, or the powers of order to protect themselves, or they merge the combined powers of death and shadow to deal damage to enemies. Now this is really weird because this is a concept of a Tinker class. So this is like a Tinker class infused with Titanic power that's also using like death and shadow damage and healing. So this is a very weird one, and I'm not exactly sure what they're trying to get at with this. Prismatic almost sounds like its own class, but this is obviously being asked as a concept of a Tinker. And just keep in mind that they will also jumble up information in a lot of these surveys. So they're asking about a Tinker class, but they could just be having that as like a random bit of information. And then Prismatic is actually its own class. So keep in mind, it doesn't necessarily mean all of these things are actually in correct orders. But then on survey page 5, answer the following question for the concept of a Tinker class again. And this one's Bard, a supporter, healer, and tanks. They utilize a Song of Azeroth to cast mighty spells, support their allies, and weaken their enemies. Bards shine in a group, empowering and improving the spells of others, and at the same time bringing numerous songs and auras to help their group reach new heights. Now again, it is quite weird that they're talking about a Tinker class concept as a bard. You wouldn't think they would be the same thing. This is something that could very much happen in the game. I know if you're a more experienced, more hardcore player of WoW, a lot of more endgame players haven't really liked the first support spec being added into the game from the Evoker, but I think the general community have probably really liked having a support in the game, and having a full bard is just something so many people would want. Even just not caring about the balance issues, having a bard as like a full healer support would be absolutely crazy, even a tank support. And also, it is a really interesting idea to have bard use the Song of Azeroth herself to be a supporter. And that is also another reason why I think this is one of the things that they are probably further along in developing. This honestly sounds like something that could very much be an actual addition to the game. After we get like maybe into the Last Titan, a new bard comes in using this new power on Azeroth to be our first full healer support. And also having like a tank support is a really interesting idea for a lot of content in the game. But then we have survey page 6, answer the following question for the concept of a gunner class. Not something I figured out here in World of Warcraft, but we have gunner. Also, this one is also weird because it's a gunner class, but then the concept is just gunner. So quick, offensive, ranged combat characters that wield 2 pistols at the same time. They apply different elemental effects to their weapons to create the deadliest arsenal of destruction against their foes. Also, very interesting, we don't have something like this, and while this may sound almost more futuristic or modern, it could still work in WoW because we do have pistols in WoW. It just wouldn't be more futuristic pistols. So it would kind of be probably like a mid-range, fast-moving class, almost like a purely ranged-based outlaw rogue, because the outlaw rogue obviously has guns, but they're still melee. So this would be kind of the mid-range version of that. Also, being the first class that just uses guns, doesn't use bows or anything like that, could be quite interesting. And also, we have the Evoker that's like a mid-range class. So this could possibly be something they want to add more mid-range classes, which would kind of help fill in that area, because that's been one of the biggest issues with Evokers in Raid. Having that mid-range is quite odd when it's the only one that has it. But then we have survey page 7. Answer the following questions for the concept of a Astrologian class. And Astrologian are mighty spellcasters that use the cosmic powers of the stars and gravity to deal devastating damage. They utilize celestial energies to cast spells, manipulate gravitational fields, summon meteor swarms, and create star explosions. Now, this one is obviously much more inspired by the sci-fi elements of the game. Obviously, you go to something like Legion, there's a lot of sci-fi elements in that. This is definitely taking more inspiration from those cosmic powers, but that is also quite interesting. Having this different type of spellcaster with kind of these new cosmic powers could be really cool. Also, I'm just thinking about the spell animations and how crazy those could actually look, so that could be really cool. Then we have survey page 8. We want to present a few extra class concepts now. Some of them were already presented, others are new. So first off, we have Apothecary, masters in the creation of potions and brews, which they can use to harm enemies and empower and heal their allies. They create a unique combination of elements, give potions varying effects, be it explosive, toxic, or granting extreme power. Now, this is something that's really cool. We already have apothecaries in the game as NPCs, and this is just one of those really thematic classes that a lot of people would absolutely love. Just brewing up potions, throwing potions at people, empowering them over there, making toxic clouds over here. That will legitimately just be really cool, and it could fit in the game pretty well. We have Astrologian, which is the same exact description we already went over. We don't need to go over that again. We have Bard, which is the same description we already went over. We have the Witch, which are damage dealers and healers that use old magic to reach towards darker natural powers. Their magic includes curses, familiars, rituals, spiritual connections, poisons, decay, and more. The class builds onto the teachings of witches and dark magicians of WoW, including the witches of Drustvar and Gilnean harvest witches, the decay gnolls and troll hexes, and spirit magic. This one's actually interesting because they added more lore behind it, and everything they mentioned are really interesting parts of the game that I don't think we've gone enough into. The decay gnolls from Dragonflight, that storyline kind of just ended almost. Troll hexes and spirit magic we've heard a lot about over the years, and then the witches of Drustvar, which was one of the coolest parts of BFA, but just kind of ended after the zone ended. So all of those elements being tied into a class is something I could see be a really cool part of the game. This would obviously be like a much more dark, gothic inspired class, but it could actually work pretty well. Then we have Celestial Lancer, a warrior that uses spears and titan magic that are empowered by the gods for quick jumps and strikes. Now this is the one that could fit into the game because you have Odin being basically a servant of the titans, and you have the warrior class hall that is very inspired by Viking themes, but he's still a servant of the titans, so he can empower you with their magic. But there's not a lot of information on this one. This sounds like one that someone just made up for another question. It could be cool and work, but if I were to choose one that is the least likely so far, it'd be the Lancer. Then we have Battle Mage. Battle Mages empower their weapons with the might of the elements to aid their allies, weaken foes, and create constructs to control the battlefield. This is a really cool concept in fantasy. You have a Battle Mage, they have a bunch of weapon infusions, and you're this magic melee user. This one obviously is seeming to be some type of support. They can summon these constructs, so they have some summons built in. Could be really cool, but they would have to be really smart building this to not make it too similar to things that like mages or other classes have. Then we have Artificer, a melee-based tank, damage dealer, and healer. They use a mix of handmade machines and Titan technology. Mechanic reactive gear is the foundation of their power. While utilizing new weapon types like extendable flails or reactive shields, this class is on the front lines of battles and protects and supports their team with their inventions. Now this one is interesting and almost sounds like it'd be part of a Tinker class, which, as I mentioned before, some of these can be jumbled up just to try to get different information. But this also does sound cool. We kind of have something like this with the gnomes with their big mech suits and stuff. Also, this one could be something because I do like how they're kind of mentioning new weapon types, extendable flails, these reactive shields which sound like kind of more mech style shields, and being these frontline support. So this one I'm still kind of 50-50 on. A lot of the concepts are really cool. Then we have Survey page 9. So this is just a new page with a bunch of new options. We have a Ley Weaver. Ley Weaver are connected via ley lines to the natural powers of Azeroth. Their connection to these arcane power lines allows them to move quickly along them and to manipulate the unseen energies that flow through everything. They help allies, deal damage to enemies, or buff and debuff as wanted. Now this could be something in the game. Ley lines are actually really important to the game, and maybe we could see Medivh returning and teaching citizens of Azeroth to become these Ley Weavers. That could be a pretty big story tie-in because Medivh hasn't been seen for a long time. He's out there doing something important, so that could be pretty cool, and that is a pretty big element in the lore and kind of magical powers of Azeroth. We have Gunner, which we already went over that description. We have Prismatic, we already went over that description. Then we have Gunslinger, cunning and agile melee combatants that use two pistols at once. Their sharp eyes allow them to see the weak points of their enemies and deal with them quickly. Gunslinger and Gunner seem kind of similar. Almost sounds like it could be two different specs of the same class, or this is just kind of one idea split into two. Then we have maybe the most on-the-nose class name, Titankiller. Titankillers combine the sword fragments of Tacelorak and Gorabol to use the powers of Gorshalak and connect to the cosmic powers of the Titans to destroy any threat to Azeroth. While this would be cool, this one is the most throwaway. The class name is throwaway. So if there's one so far on the list that I'm like, that one's just in there to be in there, it's Titankiller. But then we have Necromancer. Summon an army of undead that follow your commands and overrun enemies in combat. They combine different summoning spells to build the perfect army, and I'm not sure if this one is something they'd add to the game. This is something so many people, including me, would want. Necromancers are obviously a very big part of Warcraft's history. Even going back to like Warcraft 3, Necromancers are everywhere. Necromancers are basically something you get to use. Necromancers are something very prevalent within the game, and they would be very cool to actually play. We don't really have a full summoner class. I mean, we have some specs like the Warlock, who has quite a lot of summons, but they're all these little non-permanent demons. We have the Beastmaster, which has a few permanent pets, but also summons a ton of non-permanent pets as well. A Necromancer just having this massive army of like permanent summons just sounds so cool. Then we have Tinker, and this one's interesting because before there was different things asked about Tinker, but they didn't give a description of Tinker. This one sounds like the actual description of the Tinker. So genius inventors who have uncovered the secrets of the Titan technology and using it to protect their allies, heal wounds, and attack enemies. Through their understanding of machines, Tinkers can create inventions, custom-made skills/spells, control mech suits, and deploy mechanical constructs to create an advantage in combat. This is one of the top ones of this could exist and be added to the game. Now, the one really interesting part is custom-made skills/spells. This being in parentheses makes me think this is a mechanic they're talking about and not like some lore element. That could also be something very interesting to make a new class feel very unique. You get to create a spell somehow, but also them controlling mech suits and deploying mechanical constructs like turrets and stuff. That's just such a cool concept. That's why people have been talking about Tinkers for like over a decade. And then next up we have Warden, and this translation is a little bit weird, but versatile armored hunters who with their art of chakrams and traps, devastating range and melee attacks employ. So I'm not sure if this was just kind of like not a complete sentence or was just weirdly translated. And then we have the Spellbreaker, melee characters that specialize in the combat against magical powers. They ward magic, but they can also empower their gear with the magic of their enemies to improve their combat capabilities. This one is also very interesting, not necessarily because I think this is going to be a class I'll add, but just because of the mechanic they mentioned. They can also empower their gear with the magic of their enemies. So this sounds like you're almost as a class mechanic enchanting your armor as like temporary enchants. That's a really interesting concept that I think could be really cool with the class. And then for survey page 11 through 19, they're just asking about a bunch of different classes. There's like 4 or 5 in every one of these questions, and they're just asking which out of these section of classes they went over, which one would you be most likely to play or not to play if they were added into the game. And then down at survey page 20, we have lastly, we would like to know which class concept would be the most interesting to you if you could play it in WoW. So they're basically just, after describing all the classes, they're asking you what you're most likely to play, what you're not most likely to play, and what is your most interesting class out of these. Now, if I would have to choose the thing I would want to play the most, it would probably be Necromancer. Necromancer sounds really cool just as a concept, but then you also have something like a Bard. Bard support sounds really cool as a concept. Apothecary sounds cool as a concept as well. But that's pretty much all the information we got from the survey, and I'm very interested to see where this goes, because at this point it's guaranteed that one of these class concepts is going to be added into the game sometime in the future. It may even be a few years in the future. This may specifically be for the Last Titan. We've gotten surveys that haven't been added into a Blizzard game for years after the survey, so we could just see this in some future expansion, not necessarily Midnight, but that's pretty much all I want to go over, so thanks for watching.